I first set foot in Primrose Meadows on an early spring morning, my car loaded with boxes of personal belongings and a few potted herbs I'd nurtured for years. By all accounts, this suburban haven in the northeastern United States promised lush green spaces, family-friendly cul-de-sacs, and a well-run homeowners association that maintained the highest standards. After decades traveling across farms and towns as head of the National Organic Farming Association, I craved a slice of ordinary life. My partner, Lydia, and I wanted a quiet place to settle and focus on expanding the association's local outreach programs. At first glance, Primrose Meadows seemed to fit the bill. Rows of neatly trimmed lawns and pastel-colored houses lined gently curving streets. Flowers bloomed in meticulously arranged beds near community signs. Children biked around without worry, and neighbors exchanged polite waves. I felt a wave of relief. Maybe, at last, I could enjoy a home base where I wasn't always on the road. Once our moving truck pulled up to Lotus Grove Lane, we encountered our first neighbor, a woman in her mid-50s, hair styled in frosted waves, wearing a crisp blazer despite the casual morning. She introduced herself with an air of authority, Brenda Ashby, though locals, I'd later learn, privately referred to her as Karen. The moment she spotted us unloading planters of basil and rosemary, her lips thinned in disapproval. "Welcome," she said curtly. "I'm Ms. Ashby, the HOA chair. I trust you've read our guidelines about external decor and general community standards." I smiled, extending a hand. "Yes, I'm Dr. Ava McAllister. This is my partner Lydia. We're excited to be here. We'll be sure to follow all the rules, of course." She barely glanced at my outstretched hand. "Yes. Well, be mindful that any visible gardening must align with the HOA's aesthetic guidelines," she stated. "We prefer a uniform, manicured look. Overly large planters or vegetable plots can be unsightly. If you need clarifications, consult the rulebook you were given." Her tone was polite but clipped, as though suspecting we'd violate her pristine vision. Lydia gently nudged me, signaling for calm. After all, we'd just arrived. No need to pick a fight. I swallowed my urge to defend home gardening. The last thing I wanted was friction with the HOA. My role as the national head of an organic farming organization might not endear me to someone who disliked untidy vegetation. So I gave Ms. Ashby my warmest smile and said, "Understood," letting her walk away with her stiff posture intact. Little did I know that this fleeting interaction would foreshadow a much larger conflict, one that would test my resolve to protect local agriculture and eventually lead to the downfall of Ms. Ashby's petty tyranny. Over the next couple of weeks, Lydia and I settled into our new home. We arranged our furniture, set up a small herb patch in the backyard, and met a few friendly neighbors. My responsibilities with the National Organic Farming Association kept me busy, planning educational workshops, liaising with local farmers, and pushing for more farm-to-table initiatives nationwide. One late afternoon, while strolling around Primrose Meadows, we stumbled upon a delightful corner near the community clubhouse, a modest open-air market of sorts, with half a dozen tables where residents sold fresh produce grown in their backyards: tomatoes, cucumbers, squash, peppers, and luscious herbs. A handwritten sign read, "Primrose Meadows Community Garden Market. Open Saturdays, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. As an advocate for local agriculture, my heart soared. This was exactly what I loved to see. Neighbors collaborating, sharing the literal fruits of their labor, and fostering sustainable practices. I introduced myself to a woman named Patricia, who oversaw a table brimming with kale, radishes, and homemade jams. "This is wonderful," I told her. "I had no idea we had a community-run garden market." "Is it new?" Patricia beamed. "We've been doing it quietly for a couple of years now. Many of us love growing our own produce, and it's fun to trade or sell extras. The HOA leadership used to tolerate it, so long as it stayed small and low-key. Lately, though," her voice trailed off, concern shadowing her face. "Is something wrong?" I prompted gently. She sighed. "Ms. Ashby, Karen, has been making noise about shutting it down. She claims it's not officially sanctioned by the HOA, and that it draws undesirable foot traffic. But we're all neighbors, or friends of neighbors. It's not a big operation, just folks sharing what they grow." At those words, my chest tightened. I'd seen this scenario before, a well-meaning community agricultural effort threatened by petty local power struggles. The idea that Ms. Ashby might kill such a beneficial project purely for aesthetic reasons filled me with anger. But I kept my voice calm, encouraging Patricia. "Don't lose hope," I said. "There's real value in local produce markets. Maybe she'll come around, or the community can push back." Patricia gave me a weary smile, as though she had little faith in changing Karen's mind. "We'll see. We've scheduled a meeting soon to discuss the future of this little market. We need all the support we can get." On my walk home, I mulled over the predicament. The community garden market was precisely the type of grassroots effort my association championed. If Ms. Ashby followed through with her threats to ban it, not only would it hurt neighbors who relied on the market for fresh produce or supplemental income, but it would also send a chilling message that local farming or gardening had no place in Primrose Meadows. That was unacceptable, both ethically and personally. Still, I wanted to tread carefully. I'd just moved in, and while Ms. Ashby's brusque approach annoyed me, I didn't want to start a war. Perhaps reasoned dialogue could prevail. Yet, given the subtle hostility in her eyes when she saw my herb planters, I feared a bigger conflict was inevitable. The next HOA meeting arrived on a warm Wednesday evening, held in the community clubhouse, a tastefully decorated room lined with photos of Primrose Meadows' founding. Rows of folding chairs faced a long table where Ms. Ashby and 2 other board members sat. I took a seat near the front, noticing a decent turnout, maybe 30 residents, many with anxious or determined expressions. Lydia sat beside me, quietly supportive. After mundane matters like landscaping budgets and mailbox paint colors, Ms. Ashby announced the next agenda item. Discussion of unauthorized produce stands near clubhouse. She pursed her lips, scanning the room with an air of disapproval. "We must address this to protect our community's image and consistency." Patricia stood, clearing her throat. "Ms. Ashby, we'd like to clarify that the produce stands aren't unauthorized. They're run by residents, primarily for neighbors. The foot traffic is minimal, and it fosters a sense of community. We share healthy, homegrown fruits and vegetables." Ms. Ashby cut her off. "Nevertheless, they are not officially recognized by the HOA. We've received complaints about clutter, potential health code violations, and the possibility of attracting non-residents. Also, it's unsightly to have tables and tents set up. We want to maintain a high-end suburban aesthetic, not look like a roadside flea market." Murmurs of protest rippled through the audience. One older man, Mr. Greenfield, piped up, "No one's complained to me, and I'm right next door. People enjoy the market. It's a positive feature." Another neighbor added, "This is a tradition. We'd appreciate the board's support, not condemnation." Karen's expression soured. "While we respect your opinions, the board sees the bigger picture. The produce stands can't continue without formal approval. So, we will put it to a vote. All in favor of discontinuing these so-called community garden markets in common areas?" A hush fell. The 2 board members looked uneasy. Ms. Ashby gazed at them sharply, as though daring them to defy her. One was Ms. Carter, who seemed hesitant, scanning the crowd. The other was Mr. Zhang, who rarely spoke. Ms. Carter cleared her throat. "Do we have data on these alleged complaints? Perhaps we should gather input from more residents before deciding." Karen fixed Ms. Carter with a glare. "The board has enough input to act responsibly. The market is an eyesore, especially as it grows. Let's keep our neighborhood polished." I moved to ban any produce sales or stands on HOA property, effective immediately. Anger flared in me. I stood. "Excuse me, Ms. Ashby, Brenda, if I may speak?" She narrowed her eyes, but gestured for me to proceed. Briefly, I inhaled. "I'm Dr. Ava McAllister. I recently moved here and am a strong proponent of local agriculture. These markets provide fresh, nutritious food. They promote neighborly bonds, sustainability, and health. They're not eyesores, they're an asset. Banning them punishes well-intentioned gardeners and erodes community spirit." Karen gave a tight smile. "While we appreciate your input, Dr. McAllister, the board must prioritize uniformity. If residents want a garden, they can do so privately. Public stands are not in line with our aesthetic standards. This discussion is concluded." And with that, she hammered her gavel, ignoring the outcry from several attendees. The 2 board members reluctantly raised their hands in agreement with Ms. Ashby's motion, apparently cowed by her authority. The motion passed, effectively banning the community garden markets. Gasps and protests filled the room. Patricia looked devastated. Ms. Ashby simply stood, motioning for adjournment. I saw the determined gleam in her eyes. This was her domain, and she'd just flexed her power. As we left the meeting, I overheard neighbors muttering about how unfair it was, how Ms. Ashby never listened. Some lamented that they might have to hide or stop their gardening altogether. My blood boiled. This ban wasn't just petty, it undermined everything I stood for. I resolved then and there to find a way to overturn her edict, preserve the garden market, and show Ms. Ashby that she couldn't steamroll over basic community values. In the days following the ban, a tense hush settled over Primrose Meadows. The usual Saturday morning garden market vanished. Residents hesitated to gather near the clubhouse, fearing HOA fines or public shaming from Ms. Ashby. The once lively corner turned eerily silent. Yet Patricia and a few others refused to let the market die so easily. They relocated it temporarily to a private driveway, Patricia's own. On the next Saturday, half a dozen families quietly set up tables on her property, just beyond HOA land. Word spread through text messages, not publicly advertised. I visited, heartened to see at least some produce exchanging hands. But attendance was low. Many residents were too nervous, uncertain if Karen would penalize them for violating the spirit of the ban. I recognized that fear all too well. Over the years, I'd seen how local tyrants used intimidation to squash beneficial initiatives. The question was how to fight back effectively. Legal channels? Possibly. Typically, HOAs could regulate common areas but had limited authority over private property. If we found a location outside official HOA spaces, we might keep the market alive. Still, Ms. Ashby could conjure new rules about traffic, signage, or nuisance to hinder us. Meanwhile, I decided to use my professional standing to gather more data. I reached out to local contacts in the county extension office, explaining the situation. They confirmed that small neighborhood produce markets were not illegal. They also pointed out the many health, environmental, and social benefits of local produce. One official confided that Ms. Ashby had a reputation for heavy-handedness. She'd previously tried to block other communal projects, including a proposed orchard. Encouraged, I helped Patricia's group refine their approach. Keep the market invitation only, set up behind fences, and accept only short-term foot traffic to minimize Ms. Ashby's accusations of disruption. Yet I knew these half measures wouldn't solve the bigger problem. The real solution lay in challenging Ms. Ashby's authority at the HOA level, proving that her ban was unjust, perhaps even outside the bylaws. A small but growing number of neighbors confided their frustration to me. They wanted the market back in the public square, unafraid of fines. Some suggested petitioning for Ms. Ashby's removal from the chair. Others worried she held too much sway over the board. Then came a potential breakthrough. A local journalist from the county newspaper, the Pineview Gazette, learned about the ban. She reached out to me after hearing I was involved with local agriculture. We agreed to an interview, on condition of anonymity for neighbors who feared retaliation. I gave her a broad overview of how the ban had crushed a beloved community tradition, framing it as a clash between petty aesthetics and genuine community well-being. She seemed intrigued, hinting she might run a feature about the HOA chair who hates vegetables. If the story went public, Ms. Ashby might face external pressure. But the risk was that she'd lash out even more aggressively. The tension was palpable. Lydia often teased me for diving headfirst into a local feud, but she understood how important it was to stand up for the market and for the principle that communities have a right to local, sustainable agriculture. Sure enough, my stand against Ms. Ashby was about to escalate, culminating in revelations that neither she nor the neighborhood saw coming. One sunny afternoon, while Lydia and I were replanting herbs in our backyard, Ms. Ashby made an unannounced visit. She marched through our side gate, ignoring the courtesy of a knock. Her expression was as tense as ever, her arms crossed over a pastel sweater. "Dr. McAllister," she said curtly, "I need a word." I set down my trowel, rising to meet her gaze. "Sure. What can I help you with, Ms. Ashby?" She surveyed the small herb garden behind me. "You're aware that large-scale gardening is not permitted without prior HOA approval. This arrangement might be borderline acceptable, but I advise caution. We don't want you selling produce from your yard or encouraging others to do so. The market ban is still in place." A surge of annoyance flared within me, but I stayed composed. These are personal herbs for household use. No violation of any bylaw as far as I know. Unless you plan to ban thyme and rosemary too? She frowned. Don't get snide with me, Dr. McAllister. I've heard you're stirring unrest, advising certain residents about ways to circumvent the ban. That's dangerously close to subversive behavior. I stiffened. Subversive? People merely want to share produce. That's not subversion, Ms. Ashby. It's community spirit. I'd argue your ban is the real problem. Her eyes narrowed. Your snark is noted. Let me be clear. The HOA demands compliance. If you continue meddling, you risk fines or other sanctions. And let's not pretend you have any special authority here, no matter your farming background. I exhaled sharply. She was tiptoeing around the fact that I was more than just a casual gardener. Should I disclose my position as head of the National Organic Farming Association? Part of me worried it might inflame her or lead to further attempts to undermine me. But I also sensed that, at some point, revealing my credentials could apply pressure. With measured calm, I said, I'm not just a hobbyist, Ms. Ashby. I had a national organization devoted to organic farming and local markets. I have resources at my disposal. If you keep threatening neighbors, you might find yourself facing real consequences. She scoffed. Are you trying to scare me with illusions of grandeur? This is my domain, Dr. McAllister. You may have some fancy title, but the HOA rules stand. I've dealt with uppity newcomers before. They always learn who's truly in control here. I felt a jolt of anger at her condescending tone, but I refused to lash out. We'll see, Ms. Ashby. The real question is whether you want to be known as the chair who destroyed a beneficial neighborhood tradition or one who fosters community well-being. Her lips curled in disdain. She flicked a dismissive glance at my herb patch. Consider this your final warning. Don't push me. Then she spun on her heel and stalked away, leaving me fuming. After she left, Lydia approached, having overheard. You okay? She asked softly. I nodded, but my mind raced. Ms. Ashby was doubling down on intimidation. If push came to shove, I was prepared to throw my professional weight behind a formal challenge, potentially bringing in lawyers, local press, or even national coverage. This was about more than a few tomatoes and peppers. It was about a fundamental right to sustainable living. Yet an internal voice reminded me that such a conflict might get ugly fast. Could Ms. Ashby escalate further, or would she yield once confronted by a bigger force? As I pondered, storm clouds gathered in the distance, a metaphor, perhaps, for the brewing battle. Days later, a buzz swept through Primrose Meadows when the Pineview Gazette published a front-page article titled, HOA Bans Beloved Community Garden Market. Neighbors outraged. The piece featured anonymous quotes from residents describing how Ms. Ashby's ban crushed a treasured local tradition. Photos showed the once lively market stalls, now abandoned. The article questioned why a small, neighborly produce exchange was labeled an eyesore, highlighting the health and social benefits lost. Although my name wasn't cited, it mentioned a new resident with professional expertise in sustainable agriculture, who opposed the ban. The article cast Ms. Ashby in an unflattering light, suggesting she placed aesthetics over the neighborhood's well-being. Importantly, it also referenced the broader movement for local, organic produce in modern American suburbs, framing her stance as out of touch. The reaction was immediate. Neighbors whispered about the article, some excited that the outside world now knew about their plight. Ms. Ashby, on the other hand, publicly fumed. She posted a statement on the HOA's website, calling the article biased and sensational, and insisting that outsiders have no say in our internal matters. But it was too late. The story had triggered sympathetic calls from local farmers, environmental groups, and even a city council member who expressed interest in reversing the ban. Sensing an opportunity, Patricia and I began strategizing. If we could prove the market had broad public support, maybe the HOA board, minus Ms. Ashby, would reconsider. Or, if not, we could push for a recall vote removing Ms. Ashby from power. Her iron grip might be weakened if enough neighbors stood against her. Meanwhile, Ms. Ashby's allies responded with a wave of petty rule enforcement. Several households, including mine, received letters citing minor violations like overly tall grass or decorative items in front yard not matching HOA color scheme. The timing was suspiciously retaliatory. Some neighbors caved, quietly removing any questionable items. Others, emboldened by the Gazette's coverage, threatened to fight back. A second local newspaper picked up the story, expanding the coverage. Social media lit up with commentary, labeling Ms. Ashby as a prime example of HOA tyranny. An online petition to let Primrose Meadows farmers sell their produce gained traction, netting hundreds of signatures from within and beyond the neighborhood. Lydia posted it on her personal page, which also garnered support from my association colleagues. In short, Ms. Ashby's attempt to keep the ban hush-hush had backfired spectacularly. Her clampdown on the garden market was now a public scandal, setting the stage for a final clash between her misguided authoritarian approach and the unstoppable tide of communal solidarity, fortified, as she'd soon discover, by my official position in the national organic scene. Amid the turmoil, I received a discreet visit from an unlikely source. Henry Carter, one of Ms. Ashby's fellow board members. He slipped a note under my door requesting a private conversation. Intrigued, I invited him over one evening after dinner. Henry arrived nervously, glancing around as if worried about being seen. He was a soft-spoken man in his late 60s, with kind eyes and a stooped posture. We sat on my patio, sipping iced tea while crickets chirped in the summer air. "You must wonder why I came," he began haltingly. "But I need to talk about Brenda, Ms. Ashby, and the ban. I realize I voted with her at the meeting, yet I regret it deeply." I studied him, heartened that guilt gnawed at him. "I appreciate your honesty. May I ask what changed your mind?" He exhaled heavily. "I've been on the board for years. Brenda took over as chair 2 years ago, and she rules with fear. She threatens fines or ostracism if we disagree. I was scared to vote against her. But seeing the heartbreak she's caused, I can't keep silent." He went on to reveal that Ms. Ashby's vendetta against the garden market stemmed partly from her personal beliefs. She found rustic produce stands tacky, and partly from prior disputes with some neighbors. She disliked losing control, especially to something that might overshadow her meticulously curated neighborhood image. Henry confided that Ms. Ashby had publicly declared at a private board meeting, "Over my dead body will that farmer's bazaar turn Primrose Meadows into a peasant village." I cringed at her elitist language. "That's shocking. So there's no rational reason, just prejudice?" Henry nodded. "Yes, and it's tearing the community apart. I want to fix this. If you can gather enough support from residents, we can call for a special board vote or a recall petition, removing Brenda. But we'll need solid evidence of wrongdoing and a clear majority of homeowners on our side." I felt a surge of hope. "Thank you, Henry. That means a lot. I'm working with neighbors who want the market back. If you're willing to speak up, we might sway the other board member, Ms. Carter, or even hold an official recall. We also have the media's attention." He took a shaky breath. "I'm terrified of crossing Brenda, but enough is enough. We can't let her tyranny ruin what people love. Just proceed carefully. She can be vindictive, and she hates losing." After he left, I relayed the conversation to Lydia, my mind spinning with possibilities. We had an ally inside the board, which could be crucial to dethroning Ms. Ashby. With the media momentum, public outrage, and potential legal angles, we had multiple fronts to challenge her. The puzzle was how to orchestrate it effectively, how to unify neighbors behind a single push that Ms. Ashby couldn't silence. What none of us realized was that a new crisis was brewing, one that would thrust Ms. Ashby's misdeeds into an even harsher spotlight, eventually culminating in a severe and well-deserved punishment. Summer storms gave way to scorching heat waves. Then a fresh problem emerged, an outbreak of a plant fungus that threatened local crops. While it primarily affected commercial farms outside Primrose Meadows, a few neighbors noticed their vegetable plots and backyard fruit trees wilting alarmingly fast. The county extension office declared the fungus highly contagious among plants, urging immediate quarantines and treatments to prevent widespread damage. For small-scale gardeners, this spelled potential ruin. Unless they could isolate infected plants, consult agricultural experts, and adopt organic fungicidal measures, entire harvests might be lost. The Extension Office recommended community-based cooperation, neighbors pooling resources, sharing tips, or collectively disposing of contaminated material. This put renewed focus on the now-banned garden market. If allowed to continue, it could serve as an information hub where local gardeners shared best practices. But with Ms. Ashby's edict in place, many were too scared to gather. This deprived them of a unified response and risked letting the fungus spread unchecked. Patricia came to me in tears. Her prized tomato vines were showing signs of the fungus. Without the market, I can't consult the others easily, she fretted. I used to discuss issues face-to-face each Saturday. Now, I'm isolated. Seeing her despair, I offered to host a private workshop in my backyard, inviting a handful of impacted gardeners. I'll contact a specialist from the Extension office who can talk about organic antifungal treatments, I said. We'll keep it small and discreet, on my property, so no one's violating the ban on HOA grounds. Within days, half a dozen neighbors attended, each bringing samples of suspected fungus-infected leaves. The Extension office rep, Ms. Delgado, provided guidance on natural remedies, quarantining steps, and how to safely compost infected waste. The session was informative, a testament to how a supportive community can rally in times of crisis. Of course, Ms. Ashby found out. That evening, I received an HOA citation accusing me of hosting an unauthorized agricultural assembly. Furious, I called Ms. Ashby to protest. She coldly stated that any group meeting discussing produce or agriculture was tantamount to circumventing the official ban. She threatened escalated fines or potential legal action if I persisted. That phone call hammered home how irrational her stance had become. A plant fungus threatened residents' gardens, yet Ms. Ashby cared more about punishing agriculture talk than supporting solutions. The pettiness was mind-boggling. I wrote a formal letter, co-signed by Ms. Delgado from the Extension office, explaining we were addressing a legitimate plant health issue. Ms. Ashby ignored it, doubling down on her claim that the HOA reserved the right to control all horticultural activities. She even implied that if the fungus spread, it might validate her stance that backyard farms were dangerous. My frustration mounted. A single unstoppable woman was blocking essential community collaboration, risking broader agricultural harm. Enough was enough. I decided to reveal my full credentials, head of the National Organic Farming Association, and use my broader influence to rally official condemnation of Ms. Ashby's oppressive measures. If she wanted a fight, she'd get it. I arranged a press conference at a local library, inviting the Pineview Gazette, the Extension office staff, and a few supportive neighbors. My association's communications director also flew in from out of state, sensing the potential national significance of an HOA punishing sustainable gardening. The small library meeting room was packed with reporters, curious locals, and anxious gardeners. I stepped to the podium, introduced myself formally, and announced, I'm Dr. Ava McAllister, head of the National Organic Farming Association. We champion local, organic agriculture across the nation. I regret to say that here in Primrose Meadows, we face a disturbing example of how misguided HOA policies can stifle community resilience. Gasps arose. Neighbors who only knew me as a friendly gardening buff suddenly realized my national standing. I explained how Ms. Ashby's ban on community garden markets, combined with her hostility toward any horticultural gatherings, threatened not just neighborly cooperation, but also the fight against the fungal outbreak. We have a real crisis, I continued. Residents deserve the freedom to grow and share produce safely, to gather for problem solving, and to support each other's agricultural pursuits. The HOA's ban undermines the well-being of families who rely on fresh produce and cripples our local capacity to address emergent plant diseases. This is not an isolated matter. These local decisions can ripple outward, harming everyone. Patricia and Ms. Delgado from the Extension office backed me up, detailing how the ban stifled crucial information exchange. Then, Ms. Carter from the HOA board, one of Karen's subordinates, surprised everyone by attending and speaking out. I regret supporting the ban, she confessed. Ms. Ashby coerced me with threats of censure. I believe we must reinstate the market and end these oppressive restrictions. The press devoured the story. They asked pointed questions. Is Ms. Ashby's stance even legal? Are residents forming a recall petition? Could the HOA face lawsuits for interfering with essential agricultural help? I answered calmly, we'll explore all legal avenues. In many states, HOAs cannot block lawful produce exchanges or hamper efforts to address serious plant health issues. If Ms. Ashby doesn't reverse course, the association is prepared to support a formal challenge, possibly culminating in legal action. We're also encouraging neighbors to unite in demanding a recall vote. By day's end, news outlets carried the headline, National Organic Farming Leader Slams Local HOA Ban as Dangerous and Regressive. Social media lit up with supportive comments. Ms. Ashby's name was trending locally, her image now synonymous with misguided tyranny. Karen's reaction was swift and venomous. She posted a rant on the HOA website accusing me of exploiting my public position to sabotage our private community. She threatened to file a defamation lawsuit if I didn't back off. But her bluster rang hollow. She was increasingly isolated, with major players, the press, local officials, even some of her board colleagues, calling her policies untenable. If Ms. Ashby thought my reveal was the final blow, she was wrong. The dominoes were falling, and soon the entire tower of her authority would collapse, dragging her into the legal quagmire she'd so arrogantly sown. Galvanized by the press conference, neighbors launched a two-pronged offensive. A recall petition to remove Ms. Ashby from the HOA chairmanship. Under Primrose Meadows bylaws, if 30% of homeowners signed a petition, a special election could be forced. Within a week, volunteers collected signatures door to door, easily surpassing the threshold. Residents were fed up with Karen's intimidation and destructive mandates. A lawsuit challenging the ban's legality. Patricia and a group of market participants, with support from the National Organic Farming Association's legal team, filed an injunction in the county court. They argued that the HOA ban on produce stands violated residents' rights to peaceful assembly and commerce, particularly since the stands had never caused the purported nuisances Ms. Ashby claimed. They also highlighted how the ban hindered vital plant disease management efforts, risking further agricultural damage. Ms. Ashby, incensed, tried to rally the remaining board member, Mr. Zhang, to her side. But he avoided her calls, evidently done enabling her. Rumor said he was sick of her unilateral decrees. Meanwhile, Henry Carter quietly furnished records of prior HOA minutes, showing Ms. Ashby had no legitimate basis for imposing the ban. No formal vote, no genuine complaints. Sensing the inevitability of a recall, Karen made one last desperate power move. She announced new emergency rules to restrict large gatherings on private property if they involved produce exchange. Many legal experts scoffed that an HOA couldn't override private property rights. But some worried that Karen might attempt to fine or harass folks until the court or the recall removed her. The day the recall petition was submitted, Ms. Ashby staged a meltdown at the HOA office, reportedly screaming about outsiders infiltrating her domain. It was clear she realized her reign was crumbling. If the recall succeeded, she'd be humiliated. If the lawsuit advanced, she'd likely face personal liability for overstepping. And overshadowing it all, the condemnation from the national organic community had tarnished her reputation well beyond the neighborhood. Privately, I wondered if she'd fold under the mounting pressure or if she'd lash out in more destructive ways. Little did I suspect that she might cross a line so blatantly illegal, it would seal her fate in the harshest manner possible. One late afternoon, Henry Carter showed up at my door, visibly shaken. "Dr. McAllister, you need to see these," he whispered, handing me a stack of documents. I found them in Ms. Ashby's personal HOA files. This is bigger than I realized. We sat in my living room, scanning the papers. They were internal emails and memos between Ms. Ashby and a private security firm. The gist: Ms. Ashby was apparently planning to dispatch enforcement teams to physically dismantle or confiscate any produce stands if residents tried reestablishing them. In other words, she wanted to forcibly remove property from private driveways or yards, an extreme overreach. She'd allocated HOA funds to pay these security goons, labeling it a beautification expense. Worse, some messages hinted that Ms. Ashby considered covertly dumping chemicals on particularly large backyard gardens to kill them off, so they stop attracting attention. She also ranted about keeping unsightly farmland out of our pristine neighborhood. My blood ran cold. This went far beyond petty fines or intimidation. She was planning literal sabotage of residents' property, potentially toxic, definitely illegal. If carried out, it would be an environmental crime. Lydia, overhearing, looked horrified. "She can't be serious. That's criminal trespass and vandalism, worse if chemicals are involved." Henry nodded. "She's serious. The memos mention starting next week if the recall petition goes forward. She wants to preempt the special election by destroying the gardens. She's unhinged, Dr. McAllister." Rage and fear churned in me. "We have to stop her. I'll take these documents to the police. also to the county attorney. This is conspiracy to commit property damage, at minimum. Henry shuddered. Yes, do it. I'm done covering for her. That night, I forwarded digital copies of the emails to a contact at the local police precinct. Their response was immediate. An investigator arranged to meet me the next morning. Meanwhile, the Pineview Gazette indicated readiness to publish a bombshell follow-up exposing Ms. Ashby's clandestine sabotage plan. So, as the recall vote approached, Ms. Ashby unwittingly dug her own grave by leaving behind incriminating evidence of potential crimes. The only question was whether the authorities could act in time to prevent her from unleashing those security teams. Because if she managed to strike first, irreparable damage could be done, both to gardens and to the sense of security in Primrose Meadows. Barely 48 hours later, we got a tip from a concerned neighbor who overheard Ms. Ashby scheduling a landscaping project for Dawn. They suspected it was the start of her covert plan to destroy certain veggie patches. Alarmed, I alerted the local police detective who'd taken the case. She advised me to stay alert and promised to send an officer to discreetly monitor the streets. Sure enough, around 5:30 a.m., two unmarked vans rolled into the neighborhood. Men in dark work clothes hopped out, heading for Patricia's backyard. A neighbor peeking out from a window recognized them. She texted our group. They're here. 5 men shovels plus canisters. We scrambled. I jumped into my car, driving to Patricia's house. As I pulled up, the men were unlatching her gate, apparently set to enter forcibly. But 2 police cruisers arrived at that exact moment, lights flashing. Officers stepped out, commanding the men to freeze. A tense standoff ensued. The men insisted they had HOA authorization for landscaping improvements, brandishing a typed slip bearing Ms. Ashby's signature. The police, armed with the sabotage emails, swiftly took the men into custody, citing probable cause for conspiracy to commit vandalism or worse. Patricia, awakened by the commotion, emerged trembling. Relief washed over her face seeing the police intervene. We later learned that the canisters likely contained herbicidal chemicals. Had they carried out Ms. Ashby's instructions, Patricia's entire backyard orchard and vegetable patch might have been ruined. The police promptly obtained a warrant to search the HOA office for further evidence. That same morning, Ms. Ashby arrived to oversee the operation, only to find her so-called landscaping crew in handcuffs, the police rummaging through files. Furious, she tried to intervene, but the lead detective presented her with the warrant. Meanwhile, Henry and Ms. Carter stood by, dumbfounded at the lengths Ms. Ashby was willing to go. With her sabotage plot exposed, Ms. Ashby's downfall was all but sealed. The police discovered more incriminating notes referencing Phase 2, chemical disposal. On top of potential charges for the produce ban fiasco, she now faced conspiracy to commit malicious destruction of property, environmental code violations, and more. The unstoppable HOA queen had met her match, the rule of law. News of the thwarted sabotage spread like wildfire. By midday, the Pineview Gazette published a breaking story. HOA chair caught hiring goons to destroy neighborhood gardens. Online forums exploded with condemnation. Even Ms. Ashby's last few supporters recoiled in horror. The recall petitions soared in signatures, crossing 70% of homeowners by evening. That same day, the HOA board convened in an emergency session. Henry Carter and Ms. Carter, determined to distance themselves from Ms. Ashby, led a motion to remove her from the chair position immediately. They cited gross misconduct, potential criminal acts, and the widespread harm done to community trust. The motion passed unanimously. Ms. Ashby, not present at the meeting, was effectively stripped of her authority. Moments later, police arrived at Ms. Ashby's home with an arrest warrant. The charges included criminal conspiracy to commit vandalism, reckless endangerment, and misuse of HOA funds, since she'd apparently used association money to hire the sabotage crew. Several outraged residents watched from their porches as officers led her away in handcuffs. Some recorded video, capturing the once dominant figure stumbling in shame. The swirl of legal consequences threatened her financially as well. Civil suits loomed for property damage attempts and emotional distress, while the insurance investigators flagged suspicious HOA expenditures under her reign. Indeed, Ms. Ashby's personal property, her prized house with meticulously groomed hedges, faced potential liens if the courts demanded restitution. As Ms. Ashby was driven off in the squad car, an air of catharsis spread. A tyrant had fallen. People murmured about how unbelievably far she'd gone, all to maintain an artificially perfect aesthetic. But they also expressed hope that now, at last, Primrose Meadows could return to a sense of warmth and unity, one that welcomed local gardening, farmers' markets, and neighborly collaboration without fear. In the wake of Ms. Ashby's arrest, the newly reorganized HOA board wasted no time. They rescinded the ban on produce stands, announcing an official community garden market to be held every Saturday near the clubhouse. The fungus outbreak needed immediate attention, so they invited the county extension office for a free workshop. Dozens of residents eagerly participated, relieved to be openly sharing horticultural knowledge. Patricia breathed tears of joy when the board not only allowed but praised her for her dedicated work in sustaining the produce trade. Neighbors apologized for not standing up sooner. Freed from Ms. Ashby's tyranny, a spirit of cooperation blossomed. People planned more improvements, a seed exchange, composting classes, and possibly a community orchard on an unused HOA plot. My heart swelled seeing them embrace the very ideals my organization championed: local, organic, neighborly agriculture. Meanwhile, the legal system churned on. Ms. Ashby faced multiple felony counts for her sabotage scheme, plus civil suits from those whose gardens she attempted to destroy. Her HOA leadership ended in total disgrace. The association she had so rigidly ruled now turned on her, disclaiming any responsibility for her clandestine acts. Reports indicated Ms. Ashby tried to bargain, offering to repay misused funds if charges were dropped. The district attorney refused, citing the seriousness of her crimes. The sabotage of personal property with chemicals was especially damning. Under the mounting evidence, she eventually pled guilty to avoid a lengthy trial. The sentencing was scheduled, but rumors suggested she faced potential prison time. As for me, I felt relief that the community could finally breathe easy, cultivate their produce without looking over their shoulders, and remain vigilant about plant health issues. My role with the National Organic Farming Association gave me a platform to highlight this local victory, inspiring other neighborhoods to stand firm against misguided HOAs. The fiasco with Ms. Ashby showcased how destructive a single powerful but ignorant official could be, and how crucial collective action was to preserve sustainable living. At last, Ms. Ashby's sentencing day arrived. A hush fell over the county courthouse. Many Primrose Meadows residents attended, seeking closure. I also came, wanting to see justice served. Ms. Ashby appeared far different from her usual self-assured persona, her hair disheveled, her face drawn, her eyes downcast. The judge read the litany of offenses: conspiracy to vandalize private gardens, misuse of HOA funds, reckless endangerment of the environment, plus additional counts of intimidation. The prosecutor emphasized how her actions endangered the livelihood and well-being of neighbors, how she'd used underhanded methods to sabotage rightful community efforts. They also cited her willingness to hire a crew to destroy property, a step beyond typical HOA disputes. Ms. Ashby's lawyer tried to mitigate, describing her as a misguided leader under undue stress. But the judge was unsympathetic. He singled out her abuse of power, her disregard for local agriculture, and the potential harm from chemical sabotage. In a stern voice, he handed down the sentence: 2 years in state prison plus significant restitution to affected families and the HOA. Additionally, the court approved the confiscation and sale of Ms. Ashby's property to cover financial penalties. Gasps spread through the courtroom. Some neighbors wept, recalling the emotional turmoil she'd inflicted. Ms. Ashby visibly trembled, tears in her eyes, as bailiffs escorted her away in handcuffs. It was a dramatic downfall for a woman who once lorded over the neighborhood with absolute control. Outside, a mixture of relief and sober reflection pervaded. The community's longtime tormentor had faced justice, with an unambiguous message: no one, not even an HOA chair, can override the communal good or resort to criminal sabotage for personal preference. In the following weeks, the new HOA leadership, led by Henry Carter and Ms. Carter, rebranded themselves as open-minded stewards, forging new guidelines that welcomed small-scale farming, protected the local environment, and recognized the beloved garden market as a permanent fixture. The orchard plan was revived, and the fungus outbreak was largely contained through cooperative effort and knowledge sharing. When I reflect on Ms. Ashby's condemnation and property confiscation, I see it as both tragic and just. Her vanity and thirst for control overshadowed any sense of neighborly duty, leading her to commit criminal acts. The punishment was severe, but so were her transgressions. Months later, Primrose Meadows is virtually unrecognizable from the tense place it was under Ms. Ashby's tyranny. The community garden market thrives every Saturday morning, bustling with families, laughter, and colorful produce stalls. Young children nibble on fresh berries while older folks swap gardening tips. A small portion of the market's proceeds supports neighborhood beautification, with new flower beds and pollinator gardens gracing common areas. Henry Carter and Ms. Carter remain on the board, promoting transparency and collaboration. They even introduced a small scholarship fund for local students interested in agricultural or environmental studies, funded partly by a portion of the produce market's donations. The sense of unity and pride is palpable. Patricia's orchard is finally flourishing. With no fear of sabotage, she's planted new varieties of apple and peach trees, inviting neighbors to adopt and care for them. The orchard is dedicated to sustainable growth and community spirit, a subtle nod to the hardships endured. As for me, I continue my role as head of the National Organic Farming Association, traveling far and wide. But I'm grateful that in Primrose Meadows, I now have a real home, one that embraces local farming values. The fiasco with Ms. Ashby stands as a cautionary tale we share with other communities. In my speaking engagements, I highlight how grassroots solidarity overcame tyranny. And Ms. Ashby? She served her prison term, lost her once pristine home, and disappeared from local news. Some say she relocated elsewhere after her release, living in relative obscurity. A few pity her downfall, but most accept it as the rightful consequence of her actions. Thus ends the story of HOA Karen, the woman who tried to ban garden markets, only to face the unstoppable force of a community empowered by knowledge, solidarity, and a national advocate who refused to back down. The residents of Primrose Meadows learned that even under an overreaching HOA, neighbors can, and must, come together to preserve their right to cultivate, share, and thrive.